Welcome, everyone, to the Relational Discipleship webinar. My name is Ebony Davis. I am a ministry researcher serving as Director of Research and Ministry Assessments for the youth worker community, and as a member of the Research Advisory Board for the 10 by 10 collaboration. I'm also a longtime youth pastor serving in a local multicultural church in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., for more than 20 years. And because of that, today's topic is deeply important to me. And I believe it's vital to anyone who cares about the faith resilience of young people. 10 by 10's vision is to make faith matter more for 10 million young people over the next 10 years, inspired by John 10:10. And this goal responds to research projecting that 10 million young people would drift away from the church over a decade. And so one major way that 10 by 10 is addressing this challenge is by championing relational discipleship radically focused on Jesus in every faith community. And so last year, the 10 by 10 Research Advisory Board partnered with Future of Faith, led by Dr. Josh Packard and his team, to produce a white paper offering a comprehensive assessment of the current landscape of youth discipleship, especially the practice and the promise of relational ministry. And so this topic is so central to the future of youth ministry that it will also shape this year's Association of Youth Ministry Educators Conference. And that's happening on October 23rd through 25th in Dallas, Texas, where the white paper will be front and center. I am really excited to be conference chair this year, and I hope you are putting it on your calendar as we speak. Well, today we are honored to be joined by several contributors to the white paper. My panelists are Reverend Dr. Lakeisha Lockhart. She is the Associate Professor of Christian Education at Union Presbytery Seminary, womanist, play facilitator, innovative educator, and author, including her recent book, Doing Theological Double Dutch, A Womanist Pedagogy of Play. Dr. Kimberly Nolan is with us, and she is the Director of Research and Evaluation at Young Life. She has led numerous national and global studies on the faith of young people, including the Relate Project, exploring adolescents' relationships with themselves, with one another, and with faith. And Dr. Dave Ron, a veteran of over 50 years in youth ministry leadership, serving in academia and as vice president at Youth for Christ. He is a ministry researcher, author, futurist, missions leadership strategist, and the co-author with me of Grit and Joy, Help for Bewildered Families of Teens. Thank you all for coming. We're so glad that you joined us and agreed to be here today. I'd love to start, and I'm going to throw this one first at Lakeisha. What spiritual practices do you think actually help young people to grow? And how do we adapt them for cultural humility and accessibility and intergenerational belonging and all of those things? What would you say to that?
Thank you. What a great place to start. But thanks for having me. I'm happy to be a part of the conversation. If I were thinking about what spiritual practices actually help young people grow today, I would say those that deeply engage their body and not just their mind. Young people want to be fully and deeply embodied, not just part of who they are, but all of who they are, right? So that means inviting practices that are movement-based, creativity. I'm a big person to play. So I'm like, yes, play. But help them really internalize their faith so that it's something lived and not just something learned, but that it's deeply embodied. So thinking about other playground arts, music, drama, breath players, we have walking liturgies, communal limits, lots of justice-oriented service things are also very practice-based as well, but really just honoring the body. If I'm thinking about how we adapt them, I think you said cultural humility, accessibility, and intergenerational belonging. I would say if we're really going to think about cultural humility, we have to start with young people and where they are. So that means talking to them, figuring out where they are, where are their stories, what is their rituals, where are they finding meaning, and how we make them more ritualized, how we make them some more of these practices instead of just giving them kind of this one size fits all practice and curriculum. This is how we do it. Start with them, start with their voice. If we're thinking about accessibility, right? Can people even get into the building? I mean, very basic things, right? Can we even get in to do the practices, right? Have we dimmed the lights to think about neurodivergent, like how things are affected? Have we thought about sound? Have we thought about using, noise canceling headphones, like, have we thought about how even in these practices there can be other ways and things that we can do? And if as we're doing these practices, we're thinking about intergenerationally, then what does that mean that they could do these with their grandparents or their younger siblings or, whomever, like storytelling or sharing meals and cooking together or collaborative art. I just think there's lots of things and ways to co-create meaning. And I think it has to really start with body work.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, Lakeisha, especially as someone who works in a multicultural setting. And I think about sometimes when we're thinking about, diverse ministry or multicultural ministry, we're thinking on a really big term or on a really big scale, right? And so we're thinking, what does this group feel or this group feel? And we're forgetting that youth culture is a subculture within each one of those cultures, right? And so I really appreciate your thoughts on that. Kim, how would you answer that question? What spiritual practices actually help young people grow? And how do we adapt them for cultural humility, accessibility, and intergenerational belonging?
Yeah, I agree with Lakeisha with everything that you have said, being especially the embodied part. And one of the things that I've become more aware of in being with young people is the great need for silence and for the opportunity in creating space for people to be aware of how you're feeling. It's hard to be embodied if you're not really even aware of what's going on in your body. And I think that those spaces also facilitate, contemplation and action. And so I loved what you said, Lakeisha, of like marrying that contemplation with serving other people. And just a simple one that I would offer to the community is the examine. I feel like that is a really accessible practice. It can be very short or long. It can be intergenerational. It fits for just about every person type. And it really does facilitate that space where you have a chance to be reflective on what you are grateful for. It gives you a space to be aware of what's going on in your past and in your future and what your hopes are. It builds the muscles of discernment, and it reminds us, most of all, that we are the Lord's beloved. And I believe from that place, then we are able to move into a space of action.
Thank you. I love that. I love that. And reminding us that we are the Lord's
Mhm.
beloved. I love that. Um, I'm thinking about the people that might be watching this webinar. And it's going to be going out to all kinds of youth ministry professors and educators in different contexts, and their students are going to be sitting in the rooms, and just on a very um, practical, I guess, level. When we think about these students that are entering ministry now, um, we're going to be talking to them about relational discipleship, right? And so, what is it going to cost them to practice relational discipleship instead of relational programming? What's that going to look like? Dave, jump in, and then anybody else from there.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just want to say how I found myself drifting backwards and going, why weren't people like Letitia and Kim and Ebony on my team when I was doing direct ministry back, 800 years ago? That was just, man, I would have loved just brainstorming and thinking into this together. And there's something at the heart and soul of my understanding of ministry right now that keeps pulling me that direction. To your question, Ebony, I think relational discipleship is going to cost students speed, scale, and supposed security of control. And I think that unpack that a bit, I think that there's an efficiency driver inside of a lot of ministry practices that make us want to, hit the mark on time and then hit it in a big way. And so you have to, show why what you're doing here is going to lead to something huge and amazing. And then it translates into work efforts every week for people that look like you got things under control, and you can account for things that are under control. I think it really defies the way that Jesus taught in terms of like I think reference the parable in Mark chapter 4 about the farmer and the seed and it grows all by itself. Whether the farmer does, I mean, there's a mystery in this process that, in fact, is heart and soul what's going on. So we get to relational discipleship delivers people as a sort of an offering to Jesus, not programs as an offering to Jesus. And when Jesus gets a chance to sort of say, "You've been faithful," he's talking about not programs typically. And I think that's where relational discipleship actually sits there, and it tussles a little bit with our limited capacity, doesn't it? I mean, you're going to put your time and effort into something, and a lot of times deficiency and image management is where we're at with ministry, and we try to promote and promote and promote and all of that stuff. And um, I think there's a way of being authentic and present in what forms people. If I could, pair those words and especially lock them into this notion of abiding with Jesus, I think that actually has impact on how we spend our time, what our vision is, and the fruit that we get to connect ourselves to.
That's good. That's good. It reminds me, as you were talking, Dave, kind of what was popping in my mind is this idea of an imperfect process. And we don't like that when we're in when we're in youth ministry, that we have to accept that it's going to be an imperfect process. Yeah, Kim or Lakeisha, jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in briefly, but I mean, yes, again, what's already been said, I think I would just add another cost is I think what we call like comfort or inherent safety. I feel like I generally don't use the term safety or like safe space anymore after I had a young man that told me he was not safe in the space and as a person, young man of color, and not to promise him something I couldn't deliver. And it was the space of remembering what can I provide in the space. Maybe it can be brave, maybe it can be courageous, it can be sacred. But if I can't promise everyone safety in the same way, because different bodies are safe in different ways and they need different things to feel that. And if we can't do that, sometimes we're doing a disservice. And so when I think about as we're like moving into relation, we have to like begin to decenter and decolonize a lot of these ways of doing things and really start lifting up a lot of these, other cultural ways of being that even us as ministers or people that the ways that we've done it is uncomfortable or we don't feel that way, but realizing that, whether we're thinking about, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, API, disability, differently abled, LGBTQIA, rural, immigrant, like realizing that all of these voices, what would it mean to like let them shape the space, like to listen to their questions, to listen to their practices. And that's going to cost us time. I think, as you said, we got to move slower. We have to listen more deeply and we have to really hear what they're having to say if we're really wanting to engage in relationship, which requires more mutuality. It requires more shared power, it requires more deep honesty, which includes sometimes our uncomfortability as leaders and ministers.
Lakeisha, I really appreciate what you just said, especially around the notion of time. I think that relational ministry is inefficient, and we need to be comfortable with how inefficient it is. I believe it yields tremendously over time, but we may never see the results of the investments that we make relationally. And so it's letting go of what we are hoping for as a immediate outcome and knowing that the time that we're spending wasting time together actually is really important.
That's so good. That's so good. And so I'm hearing all of us say, we got to, as you said, Kim, put so well, we got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable because this is not easy when it's not packaged up for us and we can check all the boxes. I love that. Um,
I'm going to make a quick confession here for a second. Uh, the word uncomfortable is right now my password to open my computer. So I might have to change it now, but that's why it's so important.
you probably should change it, but that was awesome. That's great. Um, so when I think about just from my context, when I think about relational discipleship, and here's a confession, another confession, but it's not my password. Um, when we first started talking about relational discipleship, I, as a youth pastor, have kind of been following what the youth ministry world told me. This is what I was supposed to do. This is what it was supposed to make work. This is how it works. And then the whole relational discipleship thing kind of really blew up, and we said, no, this is the way to resilient faith among young people. And there was a part of me that said, well, wait a minute, that's what we were doing in the first place in the African American church, right? That's what you did. You sat next to Sister so and so, and she discipled you through, through life, really. Um, And so this question is, what ministry practices from marginalized, immigrant, rural, and culturally rooted communities might surprise youth ministers when considered essential rather than add-ons? Lakeisha, help us out.
Yeah, I was like, "Can I jump in? Let me." um, no, I love this question because it's usually like the small things that we think are the one-offs, right? It's the special cultural Sunday, or the sharing the meal, or the festival, or the bilingual worship, or the call and response in worship, right? Or the public testimony, the collaborative services. All like those are not just decorations. Those are things that are just genuinely part of like practices of like identity formation, of communal memory, of like intergenerational care, like of sharing these meals and recipes together, of having worship bilingual when maybe you don't know all the words, but you're learning, like having these public tests. The call and response are very deeply cultural and embodied, right? And those are part of how we do that. Ancestor remembrance, land-based rituals that people do. All of those are deeply part of it. Sensory friendly worship, when we want to talk more about our differently abled and disabled and neurodivergent friends, sensory friendly worship, nonverbal participation, even like maybe not even just the having to verbalize things, but giving people like all of those, but they need to not be periphery. Like they're usually just add-ons. Oh, we're just going to throw this in. No, what if it becomes part of every service, a part of everything that we're doing, and like really start to infuse it? Like that's part of also how we're growing in faith, how we build a relationship and learning and doing a lot of these practices, moving them from periphery and just special Sundays to every time, all the things, and letting it be there. But all of those practices matter in so many ways.
Okay, Dave, jump in.
Yeah, I'm thinking about one of the most ennobling activities I've had about 20 years ago. I pulled together the team of national leaders in Youth for Christ who were over different ministries. So there's Campus Life, there was City Life, there was Juvenile Justice Ministries, there was Deaf Teen Quest, there was camps. When we got together for 3 days, and the task was to try to come up with what we called the essentials. Everybody, like everybody in the movement, and all the diversity and all the things that we were all about. And it was, once we powered through our initial advocacies, we settled on the conviction that this is a question about theological faithfulness before it is anything else. If you are going to say to anybody, I get the privilege of going to Nepal here in a few months to teach some people. I'm going, what in the world do I have to say to Nepalese people in their context? And I'm going, my only confidence is a theological faithfulness there. And then there's something about listening really well that's rooted in theological stuff, that's rooted in the practice of Jesus. It's how you love people. It's that kind of thing. And then when the particulars spill out, they look a little different in different contexts. So I'm all about essential ministry practices that are rooted here in this kind of theological reflection. And if I can make this observation, and maybe confess, I think over the years, too much of our training in youth ministry has short-circuited deep theological understanding as a driver. As a result, we're more vulnerable to the winds of the time, and probably aren't as deeply connected to the Lord Jesus in this agenda as we need to be.
Right, deep theological. I love the deep theological reflection and the essentials, focusing on the essentials. I love that. Kim?
Well, you guys have really covered so much already. The only thing I would add is I think about Jesus and his ministry and what he did. He showed up. And I think that is a lot of what we need to be doing in this space. Uh, we used to say at Young Life that you would show up to be able to earn the right to be heard. And now we've kind of even changed that to we show up so that we could earn the right to listen. That by being a present person, we are creating a space where we can build relationships with young people and listen to their stories and be the holders of those stories. And so really it is kind of coming in open-handed and letting the Lord do the work and not having expectations of even or an agenda of I'm showing up because nope, you're just showing up and waiting for the Lord to move and see what's going to happen.
Kim, thanks, Kim. What that also brings to mind for me is sort of this idea of simplicity, right? We've so overcomplicated. And when I think about these communities, the marginalized, immigrant, rural, all of these communities, one thing that a lot of them have in common, because they didn't have the big budgets and all of those things, is they had this simplicity that allowed them to show up, that allowed them to be present, that said, hey, you better focus on theological faithfulness, right? Because we don't have all of these other things to crowd that out with. And so when I think about those communities, the beauty of the simplicity really speaks volumes to me in my own ministry experience. But we do have opportunities to have big moments, right? And so many ministries will rely on events or trips and big moments, and we know those are important, right? We don't take anything away from them. They're important in my own ministry, so those are important minutes. But how can future youth workers, this current students, link these catalytic experiences with long-term relational formation? Dave, kick us off with this one.
Yeah, first of all, I want to confess that this is a skill set that I have in some ways, and maybe part of my personality to be catalytic a little bit, and so I have a bias. I'll say it that way, and it's for those things. But I come to also understand that they need to be stewarded correctly. These really matter a lot, but they cannot sustain the weight of long-term relational formation. So, the question I have for myself even is like, how do they fit rather than misdirect or misguide? How do they not necessarily replace ministry or even be the first agenda of ministry, but how do they flow into the bigger deal? And I think of them as relationship front doors. Either they're sort of introductory, or they invite you to a deeper room. Come on into this other layer here where we can have a sit down conversation that doesn't feel like it's got a lot of bells and whistles. And why are you uncomfortable here? Why I just helping just move deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think it's crucial to understand how inadequate they are is as a priority, even though they're flashy. And there's a lot of people in the pews and our funding bases who like to hear those stories, and they just are attractive that way. But that feeds our promotional instincts more than it does the real work of transformation. Abiding with Jesus is the only thing I trust to govern my availability to love others. And so there is this. I love Kim's insight about showing up. Just show up. Just show up to listen, and that show up without agenda is actually a little bit of a paper over. I do have an agenda. I want to listen to Jesus about what in the heck my agenda should be. Now I'm really fully present here, and so I love that, and my availability to others in a moment is part of the agenda. Long-term discipleship is in the category of attachments that we're called to steward faithfully, and catalytic experiences can serve that, but they shouldn't try to presume on top of that.
That's good. Lakeisha, jump in here.
Yeah, I just want to second that. So much of that is that it's the trip isn't the main point. The thing, the big event isn't the point. It's how it gets woven into our daily ecology, right? Of relationship and practices and how we shape. It's not just this. I feel like a friend of mine, we used to use it like this isolated spiritual high that we get during the moment, but it's not like literally woven into what we do. And so I guess one of the things, like as in, the religious educator in me, is I love like so what we do at our institutions is we have like work that we do before we go somewhere, because we also have trips that we take, right? We go abroad. And so we do work before. So whether it's like, playful rituals or something that you do before, like before you go, you do things during your time there, actual practices that are grounding you while you're there. And then when you're coming back, like what are some things that you're returning with? Maybe it's, you're doing an art project or a testimony service or small following up with small groups or, having to tell the adults about your trip or so something like that. But how do we kind of keep these practices going? I think that the white papers actually, uses the language of practice-based formation and in-service learning cycles, right? And how we think about the rhythm of what we're doing, the preparation, experience, reflection, integration, like how we integrate all of that really, really well so that it doesn't just stay this isolated high, but becomes something that's more sustainable and like part of your actual lived faith and experience, that way you continue to ground these wonderful spiritual highs that we have in our daily life.
Thanks so much. That's good. Um, I'm thinking about, so we now say, okay, we're going to move into this relational model. And we know that, as we've already discussed, it's kind of hard to gauge things, to talk to our donors, when we're having this relational model. We're not going to use these big moments, right? So it's great to say, oh, I'm going to gauge things about how many people show up at this camp or this event. Um, if we're trying to help emerging youth pastors sort of move away from this model and say, these aren't the most important things, then Kim, I'll start with you. How should they evaluate fruitfulness in youth ministry without falling into this sort of numbers trap, the attendance based trap?
Oh, that's such a good question. And it really does require a lot of intentionality and thought. And I think it's fine to count numbers at big events or small events. And it's great. You want to know who's in the room, right? But beyond that, I really feel like for evaluation, we really want to tie what we are doing to our mission statement or our strategic plan, to be kind of more business-like. But practically what that means is, what do we hope is different by doing the things that we are doing, by having a youth ministry program? What does it look like if things are different? And then how will I know if I've accomplished it? And so I think asking those questions of, what do we hope is different? What does that look like if things were different on the other end of whatever we're doing at the end of 2 years? And then how will I know if I have gotten there? And so I think it's really starting to change our focus to measure things that are more along faith formation, or maybe it's measuring things like belonging or close relationships or identity, believing I am worthy of being loved because I am a child of God. It's agency or service. And because we know all of those things together do increase faith and they increase flourishing. And so I think looking at, like, what are some of those bigger constructs that we might want to look at? And there are free assessments available, like if we wanted to survey our kids or something like that. But it can also be looking at behaviors like gratitude or being able to listen, or what does it look like to love our neighbor? How would we quantify that? How would we, at the end of the day, be able to explain to someone, this is how we fulfilled what Jesus is asking us to do, to love God and love our neighbor? So I think it takes creating a space where you're willing to do some thought work before you start into the measurement. It's so much easier to measure numbers, but we're really not measuring what the impact of what we're doing really is. Dave, what would you add to that?
First of all, I totally agree. And again, I can't believe I keep having to confess things. So, I mean, I'm a nerd on the numbers in a big way. But Josh has helped me a lot. Josh is way beyond me in terms of his sociological skills and his assessment. But he has come back in almost a pastoral way to all of us in ministry and go, yeah, those are kind of big deals that may or may not help you in the trenches in real relationships with people. And so what is it that helps you? And I live in both worlds. I kind of want to assess the big macro picture, but if I was pushed to try to understand what matters most for me, I'm going to center on one thing: do lives keep moving towards Jesus when I'm not kind of controlling the time, whether it's a program or the room or whatever. What absent of me and absent of what I'm initiating, are they still moving towards Jesus? And then how would I know that, Kim, to your point? Again, we're going to come back to listening, right? I'm going to come back to asking the right kind of questions, being in the kind of relationship that allows me the kind of close-up proximity and inspection that really makes a difference. We in a national role, we collect data, it rolls up, we give us some landscape. But I still remember again filling out those forms back in the early '80s to pass on to somebody else, and thinking to myself, okay, they're getting the numbers. They don't know. They can't know. And now back then I was annoyed by that, because but now I'm going, that's okay. They can't know because I only in relationship and only in that kind of proximity and that availability does it feel like I have a hint of knowing what's really going on. And that would be an example of like, how do I know that somebody's moving towards Jesus when I'm not around, when they're not responsive to, the meetings that I'm orchestrating? That's a kind of that's my threshold.
That's great. And we are moving towards Jesus and hoping that something is going to be different. What do we hope is going to be different? Thank you, both for that. And I just think about as we are changing what we hope to see in our students, that means we have to change how we communicate our assessments to leadership and all of those types of things. So these are things that emerging youth pastors are going to really have to grapple with, because that's what really matters. Okay, before we close, I want to do a quick rapid fire closing. What is one thing you hope every new youth minister carries into their first ministry context? Who wants to start?
I'll jump in. I hope. Oh wait, rapid fire. I hope that they carry a commitment to being playful and embodied co-learners rather than activities directors. Just really deeply listen to the story. Sit on the floor. Sit on the table. Just walk out. On the sidewalk wherever they are, and just don't talk at them. Just create, move, and wonder alongside them, and know that the spirit is probably already there moving where you are, and like let that flourish and rise to the surface too. So yeah, just walk alongside. Don't just talk at. That would be mine.
Thank you, Lakeisha.
Mine would be that you would pay attention to your own soul formation and that you would be practicing awareness. It's really hard to be in relationship with someone if we haven't done our own work. And it's a lifelong journey. You don't ever stop doing your own work and paying attention and growing closer to the Lord and creating space for Him to be able to speak to you. So I would strongly encourage that you build as many spiritual practices as possible into your repertoire and use them on a daily basis so that you can learn to hear the Lord's voice.
Amen, Vince.
I'm looking at Ebony right now because she falls in this category for me. Mine would be to have true allies in your journey of wanting to just kind of cling to Jesus and step into every moment with as much of a loving presence as you can. And moment by moment is no small deal. I'd hate to be assessed by moment, but it activates everything in my heart, and I can do that with Jesus and friends like Ebony who go, let's do it with Jesus.
Amen. Thank you, Dave. And for me, it would be, yes, that radical focus on Jesus. We cannot be without that radical focus on Jesus. I want to thank each of our panelists, Lakeisha, Kimberly, Dave, Josh, Brandon, for all of your wisdom, for the research insights, the ministry experience you shared with us today. Your work continues to shape how we think about relational discipleship and the future of faith formation for the young people that we serve. And we are so grateful for the time that you brought to this conversation and the care that you brought to this conversation. And thank you, everyone who joined us. We hope that today's webinar encourages you and challenges your assumptions and equips you with a deeper vision for relational discipleship that is radically centered on Jesus and grounded in real relationships with young people. As a reminder, you can find the white paper at the Future of Faith website. And if this conversation sparked something in you, we want to invite you to continue exploring these themes at the Association of Youth Ministry Educators Conference, October 23rd through 25th in Dallas, Texas. The Relational Discipleship paper will be front and center, and we'll have extended opportunities to learn and collaborate and imagine together what's possible for the next generation. We would love to see you there. Thank you again for investing your time today, and most importantly, for investing in young people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and God bless.